Shane, what would you say to a successor to the Neo Geo?
Why?
What would you say to a successor to the successor to a Neo Geo?
What?
Hot take!
A successor to a successor? What's going on?
Okay, well, according to reports, there was an investor relations press conference in Seoul, Korea, where the SNK corporate chairman was speaking. Okay. And the SNK corporate chairman had said, well, the Neogeo Mini far surpassed what we assumed the sales would be, so we're looking into making more hardware. So I guess it was translated that they're announcing that they're going to be working on a Neo Geo 2 and a Neo Geo 3.
Oh, so you mean a sequel to the Neogeo Mini?
It's very confusing. If we go through the history of Neo Geo, there's a lot of different consoles and stuff. Like I don't like this. I don't like labeling whatever if they're looking to make a console, another console. I don't like it being labeled like the Neo Geo 2 or the Neo Geo 3.
This is really confusing because if you think they were going to do a sequel to the Neo Geo Mini, they would have called it the Neo Geo Mini 2 or whatever. But the fact that they said Neo Geo 2 almost sounds like they're making a sequel to their original hardware.
Right. I think what the chairman saw, or what SNK Playmore had seen, was that, people really love all the old SNK games, all the old Neo Geo games. So whatever fervor there is for that Mini, we have to make more, maybe newer titles on newer hardware. There really isn't enough in that blurb, so we have a lot to discuss here.
Yeah.
Okay, the original Neo Geo, the MVS, is kind of what we grew up with, right?
Played it in arcades.
Yes.
It was very, very popular. It's probably one of the most popular arcade systems of all time because you bought that system and then you could change out the games with these really big, pretty expensive cartridges that had fantastic games that had graphics you just couldn't get at home.
And that was a huge part about what made the original Neo Geo machines so special, was you saw them in the arcades and they just stood out.
Yeah.
Because there was all that cool, like there's so many layers and the scaling effects and all the characters had so much personality to them compared to other offerings. It seemed like they were like a step above every other 2D sort of machine out there at the time, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there were a lot of other arcade machines out there that had the ability to switch out games, but Neo Geo was just, like, the idea was, if you were a certain consumer that really wanted to, you could go out and buy an MVS and actually, own the games yourself.
All right.
Which was important with the console they would have released just a little bit after that.
Yeah, right. Okay, so if you were really hardcore, you can get an MVS, which is an arcade unit, right? It would be super duper expensive back then. Or you could get the AES, which is basically the same hardware, but in a home console form.
Yeah, and the cartridges didn't change, so they were still really big. That's why the slot on the top is this massive thing.
And it turns out that eventually the carts for that system became even more expensive than the carts that would go in the MVS. It was a very pricey console, but the beauty of the Neo Geo AES was that it felt like a premium experience at the time, right? Yes. It felt like you were bringing the arcade home, where other consoles were saying, oh yeah, no, this is just like the arcade. It never really felt like it. The AES, it couldn't help but replicate it because the games were the exact same code.
Yeah, pretty much. See, this is the difference that we had growing up, was that during the time when they were trying to recreate the arcade experience, which is something you don't really see of nowadays.
There is no arcade chain.
Well, the arcade experience was basically Neo Geo games and things like that. So bringing that home meant that games had to be modified and changed, and that's why we got so many different versions of games like Street Fighter at home, because they were always trying to get something a little bit right in one way or another.
And it always, especially with those 16-bit consoles, maybe more so in the 32-bit consoles, we saw something that was more arcade, closer to arcade perfect. Sure. But yeah, with the 16-bit stuff, it still felt even just a little bit off. So yeah, the original run of Neo Geo hardware was very impressive. It pulled us in. It stood out from everything else. And then we had, like, the SNK continue to try to develop hardware.
Yes, they did.
Okay, here's where I start like getting a little negative, because we talked about a console recently that they put out, the Neo Geo Mini, which was a celebration of Neo Geo's past, and it was supposed to be hardware that was Well, we were convinced, or we thought that it would be something that would replicate the feeling of what we were talking about in the 90s, right?
Now, according to the chairman, it was a success.
Yeah, it sold really well, but it does not necessarily mean that it was a spot-on product. Now, from everything I've heard about this machine, the video out is muddy. The controls leave a lot to be desired, right?
Well, right off the bat, the controls aren't clicky. And I know that doesn't sound like a big deal for many people, but the controls on Neo Geo games systems have usually been clicky. They have little micro switches. You can feel when they've actually hit the up, down, left, right, or any other kind of direction of movement, and that's something that this one simply didn't do. There was controllers that were sold on the side of it, and there was the unit itself. Neither of them felt like the original controls, and those controls that were included, the ones you can get on the side, they were replications of an original controller they did, which was also clicky, and they just didn't follow up with that.
Yeah, I believe that was the Neo Geo CD controllers that they were attempting to replicate, and so it was problematic. If we look at the rest of Neo Geo's sort of console history, their releases, it's been kind of shoddy. So the Neo Geo CD came out after the AES and MVS, and it was supposed to be competing with other 32-bit or 64-bit.
It was an interesting system, but the loading times on it are insane. They are super, super long. And to be fair, it's one of those systems that have had issues over the years that people haven't really been able to go back and play again, and it kind of lost favor. The concept was the cartridges were really expensive to make, right? But discs weren't. Problem was, they didn't put the best disk drive inside of the system, so it took forever to load a game.
One-time speed disk drive in that thing. So it was like between 30 seconds and 60 seconds to load up. Like, imagine loading up a match in like a Fatal Fury or Samurai Showdown, and you have to wait 30 to 60 seconds for them to like do their intro dialogue and then wait again to get into the fight.
There are games on there where the intro screen has to load to the menu, has to load to the character select, has to load to the sequence of the dialogue like you're talking about, then the game itself. It was really bad.
So SNK also tried to release some other sort of 3D style hardware. The Neo Geo CD was still very much, had 2D titles mostly on it. They did try to dabble with 3D stuff with an arcade unit that never made it overseas because they only had about between 7 and 10 games. I can confirm 7 games released for it. It was the Hyper Neo Geo 64.
Yeah, I never heard of this myself.
So there's a version of Samurai Showdown for it that was in 3D that looks okay, and there's like one Fatal Fury title that was successfully ported, but overall it was considered a failure. It was very expensive, and not many games were released for it. It is what it is.
If you know the history of Neo Geo, you know that 3D caught them completely off guard, and that was a big problem. And to be fair, they were still making lots of money with their original Neo Geo hardware for the longest time, so there wasn't really a drive to make that new hardware, where Sega, Namco, and many other companies were making hardware on the scene. Their devices, it would usually be a board that was designed for a specific set, and then that next hardware console would come out, and then they make a bunch of games off that. But Neo Geo tried not to do that, and it kind of bit them.
Right. So we've had other releases as well. I've heard good things about the Neo Geo Pocket and the Neo Geo Pocket Color. Those are decent handhelds, but they didn't really attack the North American market.
But they still had micro switches on the controllers.
Very, very impressive.
Yeah.
But we got other products like the Neo Geo X that came out several years ago. That wasn't manufactured by SNK themselves. It was a company called Tomo, and then SNK wanted to distance themselves from that company because they made lackluster hardware. So we have a history that started with a bang. With the Neo Geo, the MVS and the AES.
Massive success. Wonderful games. Like, they are an important company, and they've got lots of good stuff going on at this point.
And then we trickled out with some poorer hardware, the CD console and the 64 arcade unit.
Yes.
The Pocket systems were okay. The X handheld, not so great. And then the Neo Geo Mini, not so great.
Now here's the thing, right? The Neo Geo Mini being a success is one thing, but the fact is, folks like us really didn't like it. I never got to play it myself, unfortunately, but all my friends that have had these units have basically talked about how poor it was and how it didn't achieve the goals they were basically setting out to achieve. And this is a unit that is directly from SNK themselves. This wasn't manufactured by anyone else.
That's why I had some hope for it. So now, whereas I was a little more positive the last time we were speaking about, oh no, there's new hardware. Oh great, there's new hardware from SNK, new Neo Geo hardware, little mini arcade. I'm not so enthusiastic now. I'm worried because, like, okay, yeah, you saw success with, well, what you deem to be success with the Mini. So are you going to take the same approach to this console and or these consoles? Because yeah, that was a little bit lackluster.
Look, I don't know. Making another Mini system, I don't think will have the success that they need it to have. And I don't believe SNK is in the market right now to make a brand new video game console that could try and like attract developers and stuff. I just don't think that's I don't think that's a smart move. I really don't. But what I do think they could possibly do is one of the following. If they wanted to make a plug-and-play system that you plug up directly to your TV that has a better video out than the Mini, that might be one thing. Has like clicky switches or clicky switches, micro switch controllers, and that kind of stuff. I could see them doing that. But because we've seen a lot of people recently, like Arcade 1UP, release brand new arcade systems, you and I talked about this quite a bit. If they could make an Arcade 1UP style system that is kind of miniature, you could fit it in your house, and has the ability to switch out games, that could be a success, and you could technically consider that the Neo Geo 2.
Yeah, you think so? See, when I hear 2, I obviously I think it's a step up. I think it's a sequel system. I feel like it's supposed to be the Super Nintendo to their Nintendo Entertainment System, right? So when I think about it, I'm like, well, in my vision, I'm like, are they going to try to make a 3D console? I think that would be not so great because we have like, I don't know, man. The market's saturated, and what made the original run of Neo Geo hardware so fantastic was that it stood out from everything else, and I don't feel like they can make a 3D console that would stand out from everything else.
Sure.
So they could dip towards 3D and lose out on the fan base that loved all their original stuff, or they could dip more towards the 2D side of things, the more classic Neo Geo stuff, and possibly only appeal to the rose-tinted glasses folks, or like, what I kind of hope for is that they walk this tightrope line where they make, okay, picture this. They make a 2D console, okay? They support their legacy. Maybe there's a bunch of games built into this 2D console, but they also start to trickle out, again, all 2D games, they also start to trickle out new games and beloved IP. In this same conference, the head of SNK had said that they were looking into making a new Metal Slug game. So yeah, they could release something like a new Metal Slug game, and don't just rely on your old franchises, but make some new stuff, trickle out some really impressive new 2D stuff. The problem that I have in my mind is that I understand, like, 2D gaming is still, like, those classic pixel games are still impressive to us. We grew up with them, we love seeing them, but is there as much of a market for it nowadays? There are a lot of people making really beautiful games with wonderful sprite art in the same vein as those old SNK games, so they don't have that same mass appeal, right?
See, if they're going to make a plug-and-play console that has preloaded games on it, that's one thing.
Yeah.
I personally do not believe that they can release another console and be successful either 2D or 3D.
Yeah.
The reason being is that their competition on the scene right now is the Nintendo Switch, the Xbox, and, you know, the PlayStation
Stadia.
The whole thing is, these folks have to work against them. And so even if those systems are primarily focused on 3D gameplay, they've got things like Cuphead. You do not compete with that market because you can't. They already have a massive install base, and any developer out there that wants to release games on a 2D-based platform is likely going to achieve more success releasing something on there. So it's important for SNK to be making the games themselves. With that being said, like I mentioned earlier, that Arcade 1UP idea, doing an arcade system in that style, no one has achieved that. Like, like Sony can't compete in that market because they're not going to release something like that. Making games that are primarily focused on 2D, maybe not 2D, 2D gameplay, but multiple players. So it could have 3D possibilities as well. I'm not saying they can't. Yeah. But have it focused so you've got one joystick, 6 buttons. I know that isn't always the case with Neo Geo, but just hear me out here. That kind of a concept where they could have a whole bunch of games being developed for this platform that are specifically designed for the arcade experience. That way, when people come over to your house, you can have this arcade system that you can play, and they can keep releasing games for that. I think that could see a major stream of success for them.
Yeah.
Plus, making 2D games now is a lot easier than making 2D games in the past, so they'd be able to make games a lot faster and cheaper than ever before.
It really depends on the approach that they take to it, because 2D sprite work, all we hear from developers is that it takes too much time, and that's why we have to do things in 3D. So that's why like Bloodstained is in 3D and stuff. So
I get that.
It would depend on their approach to it. Yeah, if they want us to grab onto some sort of a new console, things have to stick out like they did way back in the day. So even if it's not the classic 2D sprite work that we remember, it has to be some sort of style that's like, whoa, this is its own thing, because that's what the Neo Geo was.
Yes.
It was its own thing, and no one could do what the Neo Geo did back then.
Look, the only reason people went out and bought that Neo Geo Mini was not because they wanted a pocket-sized like device that they could play Neo Geo games on. They already had multiple emulators and stuff like that that you could grab, and they also had the Neo Geo X that had come out,
which was not so good. But
it was a portable device. It also had a console that you could attach to, but it wasn't great, but it was there. I believe that what people have wanted since the beginning is to have that Neo Geo arcade system in their house.
Even just that repro that you're leaning towards, the MVS, just having an MVS, arcade 1-up style MVS with like so many games in it, dude.
And look, I'm not even saying that SNK makes this themselves. I'm saying contact Arcade 1-up. Work with them. They already have the hardware. They already have that technique. They already have that skill set. I mean, it's not that SNK doesn't have that to begin with. They built these machines a long time ago, but they've got a company out there right now that already has this infrastructure built for that. So if they were to make a system that had changeable cartridges, a very sharp screen, great buttons, and I'm talking Sanwa joysticks and buttons, nothing less, then we could see a pretty cool thing happen from this. All I'm saying is that what I believe SNK is capable of is that arcade experience. And every time they've tried to do anything else, it hasn't really worked out for them. So I believe this would be the way for them to go.
Hey Shane, do you remember when they tried to make a Metal Slug 3D game back in like 2006?
Yeah.
That never came to North America?
Yeah.
Do you know why it never came to North America? Yeah, don't make 3D games, SNK. I understand the new Samurai Showdown is in 3D and it looks cool.
Well, it's technically a 2D game.
Yeah, right. But yeah, I don't know, man. I guess that's my final disjointed thought on this whole thing.
It's not that I'm against 3D game design for Neo Geo. I think they'd be capable of doing that kind of stuff, and maybe they could release a system that honors that kind of concept.
They did. It was called the Neo Geo Hyper 64, and there were 7 games for it.
It's just I know what. Everybody knows what they want from SNK, and they want that machine at home. And the ability for that machine to be sold with built-in games, I think, would limit itself. So having some exchangeable cartridge system,
that would be super cool.
That would be the way to go. Yep. I don't think they should be using the original Neo Geo cartridges. I mean, if that's something that they want to do, maybe a special version that uses the cartridges. But
yeah, for fans or whatever. But no, dude, I do not want to have to go out and buy those. Even the MVS carts they're a little too expensive for me.
You can take the entire run of Neo Geo arcade games that was released all the way back in the past, and you could fit every single one of them on a very small cartridge on the Switch. It doesn't take much to run those games nowadays, either from a software standpoint, a hardware standpoint, or even from a storage standpoint. So I just think of it this way. Think about what 2D games were like back then from Neo Geo and how much space they had on those cartridges and what they were capable of. If they could be releasing similar style games now with the unlimited space they have, we're talking better sound effects, talking far more layers of detail and just more sprite work. I mean, I get it'd be expensive to make those games, but this is going to be an expensive proposition one way or the other. But I think if it has a return from people that like it, it could make sense.
If they want to call this a Neo Geo 2, it has to feel like a Neo Geo 2.
Yes.
So like I was saying, it has to feel as its own as that first one did. So yeah, I would expect multiple layers and like hundreds and thousands of sprites at the same time. Get to work.
And here's the thing. You do something like that, you don't have to sell it for cheaper prices. You could sell it for a bit more of a premium end, right? You're selling a home arcade unit. It could be sold for $600, anything around that, maybe a bit more.
If Capcom thinks they can sell their hardware for close to $300 US, I don't know, anything's possible.
Yeah, right. I know it sounds like a big arcade unit. It would be a little bit weird, but it could be done properly where it's even limiting on the cost, because usually arcade systems were a lot bigger because they sat in like an arcade. They had a whole bunch of machine pieces in them and stuff like that. But nowadays we have better components and parts that can just make everything a lot smaller and a little bit more efficient. I think they're capable of doing this. I believe there's they have the ability to do it. It's just, will they? Will they just make another Mini 2?
Right.
I don't believe that would be a success. Or will they make a home console? And again, I don't think that makes sense considering the space they're in right now.
But if they screw it up, they have another home console just around the bend. I don't know, man. Maybe when the chairman was talking about a second and third iteration of the Neo Geo, maybe he was talking about like a light version and a pro version.
It could be that.
It could be that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what do you guys think? Do you think that Neo Geo can successfully get into like the home console landscape, even if it's a home arcade landscape? Let us know. Let us know what you think. Do you think that a new Metal Slug game is a great idea? We didn't dive too much into that. Metal Slug, ever since 3, seems like it's been woo, but I still love it.
Just a bit.